Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I would like to take this opportunity to condemn the terrorist attack. It is not justified by anything in the Islamic religion, and I totally condemn it 100% without any reservation.
This idea that you have moderate Muslims and you have radical Muslims is complete nonsense. Allahu Akbar!
I have the answer to the war on terror. See, Jesus put himself on the cross so I wouldn't have to shed my own blood.
I've got one that can see.
It's time for Radical Truth with Tony Gurley.
COVID-19, Government, Gray State, and God, Part 2. As we continue on with what is happening throughout our world, you can't get a more timely topic than the coronavirus and how it's impacting people's lives, regardless of what country you're in, regardless of what state you're in, if you are in the United States. In the first part of this series, in the last episode, we got to a number of news stories, what's happening under the government and a number of different countries, mainly the United States, but had some international ones as well. And we got into how churches are being impacted and how pastors of those churches are being impacted when they choose to defy orders and have church service. Again, there is bias going on from what we're seeing in the news stories. We are seeing that Christians and Jews are the ones who are being threatened. We see, especially internationally, a lot of authorities completely staying away from the mosques. And if they do go to them, we've seen news stories about Muslims rioting and getting aggressive and violent and so on, which of course aren't going to happen with the Jews and Christians, right? We are seeing churches just completely shut down, and we're seeing pastors arrested or fined when they do decide to meet. Continuing on with that, Massachusetts City crosses the line, fines pastor for holding service. Out of Illinois, governor crosses the line, may be restricting churches for over a year. However, several Chicago churches held in-person services Sunday despite stay-home orders. So throughout the nation, you are having pastors who are choosing to have their congregation meet. Others are having parking lot service. As we see here in New York, pastor faces $1,000 fine for holding drive-in church service. Yes, people are staying in their cars, windows rolled down, listening to the pastor, and that wasn't good enough either. So we're seeing people being threatened, people being arrested, people being fined, church pastors getting fined, and so on. And at the same time, people can't believe the news stories that we're finding out of different cities in regards to people in prison. Inmate freed over COVID-19 concerns allegedly murders a man the next day. Dozens of NYC inmates freed because of coronavirus already re-arrested for new alleged crimes. Coronavirus, Illinois frees 4,000 inmates, including murderers and sex offenders. Report: 6 of 7 high-risk sex offenders freed in California re-arrested. And, more recently, out of Arizona, and a lot of people haven't even heard of this news story, which was covered on the Radical Truth Facebook page, I believe, a while back. A former member of Al-Qaeda had been living in Arizona for over a decade and was arrested a number of months ago. And we see in this news headline, Iraqi refugee, quote unquote, accused of murder seeks release from prison over coronavirus. So we're seeing actual criminals let out of prison, and we're seeing non-criminals at least, unless they're breaking new laws, of getting the people who are getting fined, people are being arrested, etc., when the real criminals are being let out of prison and obviously haven't changed. They were going right back there. At the same time, we see a infringement upon the Second Amendment throughout the United States. Assemblymen asked California governor to suspend all gun and ammo sales. This was a while back, and as far as I have seen online, the California governor did allow individual counties to decide on if gun stores were essential or non-essential. So some are shut down, some are open for business. NRA, Dems are using pandemic to eliminate semi-automatic guns. And if you haven't heard, up in Canada, no place for such weapons in Canada, quote unquote. Trudeau announces ban on assault-style rifles. Now, a lot of people think, well, you can assault someone with pretty much anything. So it's kind of a misnomer to just give the label assault to any individual item, whether it's a gun or a baseball bat or whatever else, because either you're assaulting someone or you aren't. You aren't using an assault rifle, quote unquote, if you're defending yourself. You're using a rifle. You're not assaulting, you're defending, right? So unfortunately, a lot of people have this idea that AR is an acronym for assault rifle. AR-15, assault rifle 15. AR is based on the Armalite. That's what the AR is for. It's not assault rifle. And you can assault someone with a car. You can assault someone with anything. An assault car versus a non-assault car. It's like, it's ridiculous how many people have misinformation about this, but also how they just label it. If it looks evil, you need to get rid of it. So, at the same time, even though he's calling for a ban on assault rifles, quote unquote, a decorated Canadian retired major slams Trudeau's gun ban, and he says we are edging towards tyranny. A former NYC top cop, Carrick, blasts officials using COVID as excuse to take Americans' freedoms. And our dress rehearsal for a police state. That's the name of an article written by Dennis Prager. If you haven't heard of him, I suggest you look him up online. He has a number of great books. He's a great thinker. He has his own radio show, podcast. So I recommend reading that article because he has his perspective on what is happening. We also read from another website, The New Normal, quote unquote, and the Emerging Beast Government. The writer of this article says, it suddenly struck me that the dystopian new normal, quote unquote, of COVID-19 really is normal from the perspective of the leftist elites. And all these blue state governors and blue city mayors reveling in their new dictatorial powers truly don't have a clue of what normal is for average Americans. And he actually wrote that as a follow-up to an article that he read, found at Canada Free Press, called Beware the New Normal. And in it, the author of the article offers a four-stage situation here of what has happened and is happening and will happen from her perspective. Stage 1, demoralization, in which Judeo-Christian values and morality are systematically attacked and people's morals corrupted in every way possible. Stage 2, destabilization, in which the country's economy, military, and foreign relations are undermined. Stage 3, crisis, quote unquote. And this is where we are now. Bezmenov says it takes only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to crisis, after which one can radically alter its structure, economy, and government. Stage 4, normalization, quote unquote. This is the end game. This is the goal. This is the new world order with its one world government. Call it worldwide communism, technocracy, global feudalism, or what you will. It is slavery and misery for all but the psychopathic elites who engineered it. And it was Reverend Franklin Graham himself who said it's about control. Franklin Graham sounds alarm on government's true motive. So what's the real story behind continuing lockdowns? That's the name of this article from PJ Media. And Tucker Carlson said politicians who felt like gods, quote unquote, during pandemic don't want country to reopen. Rush Limbaugh. Democrats will try to keep economy shut down to ensure Trump loses re-election. Folks, what was happening before this all started? Trump had very high poll numbers, and even when this did start, he still had high polling numbers as well. What's interesting is this article called Lemons into Lemonade. Did President Trump trick Dems into going full authoritarian during a virus crisis? Think about it, folks. If you are living in a particular state, city, county, etc., where usually they end up being democratic, you have the most strict lockdown of all. And you are seeing what these people want for the long term. In other words, this article says that Trump has exposed the tyrannical mindset of certain leaders. And what does that cause you to do? Probably not vote for him in the future, right? If you don't like the way that you are living right now. We'll be back here in a few minutes right after this.
Hi, I'm Joe Carey with Radical Truth Ministry, helping Christians reach Muslims with the gospel. How do you get a conversation with a Muslim started? One method I like to use is what I call icebreaker questions, which are non-confrontational and open-ended. Here's an example. I'll ask, so why are you a Muslim instead of a Buddhist or a Christian or any other religion? What attracted you to Islam? This does two things. First, it offers you a chance to get to know your Muslim friend at a very personal level, his or her background, the spiritual journey, and so forth. And depending on the response, you'll know what questions to ask further. And almost every time after sharing with you, the question will come back to you. So, why are you a Christian? And since you've honored your Muslim friend by listening to her story, she will reciprocate and listen to you explain why you are a Christian. And I encourage you to do so with all the passion you can muster. You can find more about sharing with Muslims at our website at radicaltruth.net. I'm Joe Carey for Radical Truth Ministry.
Radical Truth Media presents Understanding Islam, now available on a 5-DVD set and resource disc. 20 hours of apologetics training, covering Introduction to Apologetics to Islam, the Christian and the Great Commission, Islam 101, Basic Beliefs and Practices, Christianity and Islam's Theological Differences, Jihad and Muhammad, the authority of the Bible versus the Quran, Women under Islam, Answering Objections, Sharing the Gospel with Muslims, Do's and Don'ts of Muslim Evangelism. This is one of the very best so far, especially in the way the material is organized, the relevance, and the clear presentation of the Islamic worldview and mindset. Radical Truth presents Understanding Islam, featuring Joe Carey, founder of Radical Truth. For more information, visit www.radicaltruth.net. As a 501c3 Christian ministry, Radical Truth is dependent upon God to provide our monthly financial support, and He provides through people like you who realize the need for this vital work. Your regular prayers and monthly financial gifts allow us to continue our full-time effort to equip the body of Christ with the training necessary to effectively engage Muslims with the gospel of Jesus Christ. At Radical Truth, we proclaim the truth, share the gospel, and expose Islam. Please partner with us by visiting radicaltruth.net and making a tax-deductible donation. That's radicaltruth.net.
1 John 5:13. These things have been written that you may know that you have eternal life. We have the answer Muslims are looking for. Why are Muslims here in our land today? Because God wants to get them saved. We didn't go to them, so God brought them over here to us.
This is Radical Truth with Tony Gurley.
And before the break, we were talking about an article asking, did President Trump trick Dems into going full authoritarian during the virus crisis? Because yes, that is what some people are experiencing, depending on which state or county or city you live in. Continuing on that narrative, Trump cheers on governors as they ignore White House coronavirus guidelines and race to reopen. So folks, we need to combine all the stories that we've seen thus far, again, from documented sources, and combine them with some other news stories. Starting with shocking list of what's killed the most people in 2020. This is as of April 1st, and this was recording deaths from January 1st through March 25th of 2020. Coronavirus deaths at that time, 21,000. Of course, it's higher now. Seasonal flu, 113,000. Malaria, 228,000. Suicide, 249,000. Traffic fatalities, almost 314,000. Obviously, that has curtailed and gone down, or maybe not had as many since then, because so many more people are not driving. HIV and AIDS, 391,000. Alcohol-related deaths, 581,000. How much has that gone up since this crisis began? Smoking-related deaths, 1,162,000. Cancer deaths, 1.9 million. Deaths attributed to starvation, 2,382,000. And death by abortion, hold on to your seat, folks, 9,900,000. And how much has that gone up in the crisis, number one? Number two, because abortion centers have been labeled essential services in many states, counties, or cities, depending on who your leader is. Epidemiologist, coronavirus could be exterminated, quote unquote, if lockdowns lifted. And a very interesting news story. Suspicions raised over COVID-19 tests after a fruit reportedly tests positive for virus. Yes, these are all real news stories, folks. Again, we didn't make any of this stuff up. We didn't write any of this stuff. We have just compiled it for you. CBS News admits to airing staged coronavirus clip, pulls down video. Shocking is the first word in this news headline. 66% of new coronavirus patients in New York stayed home. Renowned forensic doctor destroys media killer virus lies. Nobody has died of COVID-19 in Hamburg, this is Germany, without previous illnesses. In other words, pre-existing conditions. And when we're seeing the recorded deaths of COVID, in a few minutes, we're going to get into how those have been inflated. But even setting that aside, there's a difference, folks, between dying from COVID and dying with COVID. If someone has cancer and 6 months ago they were given 6 months to live by their doctor, Now they've lived 7 months or 8 months, and they happen to get COVID, and then they die. If that's being marked as a COVID death, well, then that's not being intellectually honest with everyone else who was probably unaware the person had terminal cancer. So how are these numbers being added up? This doctor says our voices are being silenced by media and experts. He says never in the history of this great republic have we quarantined the healthy. I mean, that makes sense, right? Quarantine the sick, but we're seeing the quarantining of everyone, right? States that reopened do not have more COVID-19 infections than ones that stayed closed. Another news headline. Combine that with CDC director on hot seat over his predictions and agency performance. Combine that with Dr. Birx reportedly believes coronavirus death toll inflated by up to 25%. And one of those cases was out of Montezuma County in Colorado. It says that the county disputes state's coronavirus death count. The Montezuma County Coroner's Office is disputing the state's claim of a third fatal case of the coronavirus in Cortez, saying the person died of alcohol poisoning. The investigation showed that the person's blood alcohol content was 0.55, or almost 7 times the legal driving limit of 0.08 in Colorado, Devers said. COVID was not listed on the death certificate as the cause of death. I disagree with the state for listing it as a COVID death, and we'll be discussing it with them this week. And that is just one of the stories which brings about this news headline. State revises COVID numbers, removes nearly 25% of deaths originally attributed to virus. And that is out of Colorado. But it's not just Colorado. This headline, the U.S. is dramatically overcounting coronavirus deaths. Now, combine that with study claims legendary 5-minute coronavirus test wrong nearly half the time. According to New York University study, the legendary 5-minute Abbott coronavirus test misses close to 50% of positive infections. And we see from the UK, new report suggests quarantine may have already killed more seniors than the coronavirus. Folks, why is all this happening in light of these last 10 or so news headlines? And we see in years past, H1N1, swine flu, the Ebola outbreak in, 2014 or so? Did this pandemic lockdown quarantine response happen for any of those? So people are thinking, okay, well, what are the possible agendas here? If there is an agenda, again, we're just providing the information to you. Globalists using COVID-19 to usher in UN Agenda 2030, Brave New World, 10 years ahead of schedule. Big Brother, COVID-19 used to launch new health surveillance. Governor raises privacy issue in COVID-19 monitoring program. He says, we need to do this in a way that makes people feel comfortable, Use their smartphone technology to trace people who are infected and inform anyone who comes in proximity. Surveillance state, UK government rolls out coronavirus contact tracing app. Yes, there is an app for that. And of course, out of the US, HR 666. 6. Got a fourth 6 in there. Illinois Democrat introduces a $100 billion contact tracing bill. Representative Bobby Rush has introduced the HR 6666 Trace Act, which includes a $100 billion grant program, which would authorize the Secretary of Health and Human Services to create an army of contact tracers operating through healthcare, schools, and nonprofit entities who would perform COVID-19 diagnostic testing, quote, through mobile health units and as necessary at individuals' residences, yes, your home, and for other purposes, quote unquote, whatever other purposes is. Italian leader slams false coronavirus numbers, 25,000 did not die. He says it's a way to impose a dictatorship. And folks, what did we hear just very recently from Katie Hopkins, who shares news from New Zealand?
You probably remember a time when you were told that you were locked down because we needed to flatten the curve. Now, of course, we see that the curve is flattened. Many of us are wondering why it is we're still locked down. And in New Zealand, something else has just happened without anybody being given any time to think about it. New legislation passed in under 48 hours without any consultation and without any of the special committees sitting. And this new legislation gives the Prime Minister huge and sweeping powers that take away many of the liberties that people will have grown accustomed to having. Number one, and I think the biggest, is that at any time the Prime Minister can go back to lockdown and quarantine for whatever rules he or she decides. Number two, the police no longer have to have a warrant to enter your home. The police can enter your home if they believe you are violating government rules, whatever rules the government decides to enforce. This is also true for the New Zealanders' marae, very special place. There was some uproar about this, and so they simply hid it later on in the legislation. But police can still enter a marae without a warrant. Nothing changed. And the Prime Minister now can push those powers to a health minister. No need to declare a national state of emergency. They can just decide to do this, and they can order entire groups of people to stay at home. Entire groups of people. What if that were based on, say, religion or your beliefs or your politics? The government can also shut down your business without warning. It doesn't need to have a police officer to do this. It can designate any person as an enforcement officer. These officers can enter a business and order it closed immediately if the rules are being broken. And it doesn't say what those rules are. They could be anything going forward. They can enter your home without a warrant. They can force you to stay inside. They can close your business. Now, if you're thinking this is ridiculously fast for legislation to pass, given it was only made public 24 hours before, that's because it is.
That's because it is, says Katie Hopkins with the news from New Zealand, who had a gun ban not too long ago themselves, and no surprise, gun crime skyrocketed after that. Folks, that's all we have time for in this episode of Radical Truth. Stay tuned for the next episode, part 3 in this series, as we continue on with government, grace, state, and God. God bless you. Share this with others, and we will talk with you soon on Radical Truth.